The series begins in a strange room inside an unknown building where we see two workers carrying the body of a young girl and tossing it into a furnace to get rid of it. The story then shifts back in time to Minneapolis, where Luke is taking a university exam. We learn that he's a child prodigy with exceptional skills in mathematics, observation, and data analysis. Luke finishes the exam in record time, so fast that the other students can't believe he's actually done. Their shock grows even more when they find out he's only 14 years old. Meanwhile, Officer Tim is at the airport and decides to cancel his flight to New York due to a plane issue. He chooses instead to return to the city of Min to escape the stress of New York and forget about a problem he recently faced at work. On the way, he rides with a local woman who offers him a lift. That night, Luke tells his parents that he plans to enroll in an Institute of Information Technology so he can pursue what he loves and build a successful life. But his parents strongly disagree with his idea. Frustrated, Luke loses his temper and stares at the tray in front of him. Suddenly, it moves on its own and crashes to the floor. At that moment, we realize Luke has a supernatural gift. He can move objects with his mind, but he has no control over his power, which only surfaces when he's angry or afraid. Later that night, a black, intimidating car pulls up outside Luke's house. A woman named Michelle steps out and says they have 45 minutes to complete their mission. She and her team then storm the house. Luke senses movement around him, opens his eyes, and is shocked to see Michelle spraying him with a sedative, knocking him unconscious. The following day, Tim arrives in town and learns that the local police department is looking for a new night guard. He applies for the job and meets Sheriff John Ashworth. We also discover that Tim is a well-known and highly skilled police officer, but he has been battling psychological trauma ever since he ended the life of a 16-year-old boy. Although the teen had been armed with a rifle and posed a threat, Tim couldn't shake off the guilt, which eventually drove him away from both the police force and New York altogether. Tim is easily hired for the new job, and soon after, Luke wakes up to find himself in a room almost identical to his own. But when he steps outside, he realizes he's inside a strange building, monitored by cameras everywhere. He meets Kalisha and learns they're at a place called the Institute, which gathers gifted children like them, and they find out the kids are split into two types, one that can move objects from a distance. They're called Tiki, and the other that can read minds. They're called TP. Kalisha is a mind reader, and Luke is stunned, unable to understand why he's here or why they took him until they tell him he's been enlisted, not kidnapped, and his mission is to save the world from destruction and war. At that moment, three people are watching them on the cameras: Julia, the Institute's director, Trevor, the head of security, and Dr. Daniel, the scientist in charge of testing the children. Julia is very impressed by Luke's intelligence and decides she wants to meet him in person. Meanwhile, Tim settles into his new role and meets his colleague Wendy. He clearly takes a liking to her at first sight, and Wendy shows him the routes he'll patrol at night. His job is to make sure the whole town stays safe. Trevor goes to pick up Luke, and in the elevator, Luke sees the girl who had taken him, but Trevor stops him from speaking to her. They reach Julia's office, and she begins to explain Luke's role at the Institute, telling him he'll undergo a series of experiments intended to save the world, and that he must follow orders to complete the tests and return home. She promises that, in the end, they will wipe his memory and send him back to his family. That night, Tim walks the streets to check on the town and meets an old woman named Annie who's obsessed with conspiracy theories. She believes powerful people control the world, that the government monitors them, and even implants listening devices in their teeth. And Tim thinks she's crazy and finds her hard to deal with. Michelle leaves the Institute grounds and notices a car pulling up to the opposite gate. A guard steps out to stop it and finds a small family inside. He tells the father to turn back the way he came, lying to him by saying the Institute is actually a contagious disease research lab and no one is allowed near the area. That night, Luke meets Maureen, the cleaning lady, who tells him that if he follows the rules, he'll earn tokens he can use to buy whatever he wants from the vending machine. She takes him to the testing room, where he meets Tony, who's supposed to attach a monitoring device to his ear. Luke refuses and is terrified, but Tony hits him and forces him to comply, placing the device in his right ear. From then on, Luke is monitored constantly, with no way to escape. The next day, Michelle meets her friend Kate at a cafe, and we find out Kate is a journalist trying to get information from Michelle about the Institute. Afterward, they leave together and pass by Tim, though he doesn't notice them, distracted with his own thoughts. Meanwhile, Luke walks with Kalisha and learns that there's a back section of the Institute, a place kids are taken after finishing the front-end testing, supposedly just before they're released and sent back home as promised. Kalisha demonstrates her telepathic powers by instantly learning the name of Luke's grandmother the moment he thinks about her. She then introduces him to George and Iris. George has the same telekinetic abilities Luke does, and and he shows off by moving a cup of water, spilling it, then lifting the water itself into the air and returning it neatly into the cup. Luke is amazed by George's control and desperately wishes he could manage his powers like that. Just then, Nikki arrives, clearly a bully, stealing tokens from the other kids in the Institute. We also learn that the children here range in age from 10 to 19. Luke grows increasingly afraid, unsure of what his own fate will be. That night, Michelle meets Kate again in a hotel room and decides to leak confidential information about the Institute to her. But suddenly, Kate shoots her dead, revealing she has secretly been working for Trevor all along, monitoring Michelle and waiting for the right moment to eliminate her for attempting to betray the Institute. Julia returns home and eats dinner alone, and it becomes clear she's a deeply disturbed person who takes pleasure in pain and torture, so much so that she even harms herself just to savor the feeling. Meanwhile, Luke plays chess with Nikki, and together they start plotting to escape the Institute. The next morning, Luke wakes to the sound of Julia celebrating. She tells him they're throwing a party for Iris, and when Luke joins, he's stunned to learn it's actually a farewell party because Iris is being moved to the back section of the Institute. She has only 13 days in the front section, passing all her tests with ease. But now she's terrified because she doesn't know what happens beyond that point. Nobody has ever come back to describe it. Though the children are told they'll eventually be returned home, Iris has doubts and breaks down crying. Nikki, who spent weeks whispering conspiracy theories, insists that the Institute disposes of the kids once they're finished with them. Soon after, Tony shows up to tell Luke to get ready for his first experiment. At the same time, Tim chats with the hotel owner, who mentions that Wendy tried calling him several times that morning, but he didn't want to wake Tim. Grateful, Tim thanks him and rushes to the station, where he learns that 2 dangerous criminals are heading toward the town, and Wendy wanted to warn him. Back at the Institute, Julia hears about Michelle's death and grows furious, especially because she's now short on staff. She's particularly angry with Trevor for hiring Kate behind her back and using her to spy on Michelle for 3 months. Trevor insists everything he did was for the Institute's good, but the tension between them is undeniable. It's obvious they despise one another, and Trevor believes he deserves Julia's position since it was his mentor who originally helped her rise to power. They then contact the mysterious leader of the organization to update him on Michelle's situation. He scolds them for their incompetence in choosing personnel, orders Julia to clean up the mess, and abruptly ends the call. Julia orders Trevor to appoint Kate as the new head of the abduction team so she can bring in fresh children for the Institute. Meanwhile, Luke is taken by Tony for his first experiment. He's strapped into the same chair, wires attached to his head to monitor his brain signals. Dr. Daniel explains that after being injected with a serum, Luke will begin to see tiny dots of light, and all he has to do is report when he sees them. Daniel also instructs him to use his powers to lift a toolbox from the table. Luke tries but fails on his first attempt, so Tony injects him with a stronger dose. This time, Luke successfully raises the box into the air without touching it. Afterward, Luke joins Nikki for a basketball game, and together they start plotting an escape. Their first problem is the surveillance cameras. They have no idea how to disable them without a jamming device. Luke suggests they lure one of the staff members to help them, stressing that it must remain a secret between them and that they need to move quickly since no one stays in the front section for more than 2 weeks. He also points out they'll need help from a TP child who can control human minds. That night, Tim talks with Wendy and asks about Annie, since he had seen her earlier arguing with a woman named Sloane in town. Wendy explains that Sloane's daughter drowned back in 2008 at a place called the Red Steps, but unlike everyone else, Annie insists the girl and her friends didn't drown. She believes the Institute was behind their deaths. Annie also claims she has supernatural abilities, can read thoughts, and even glimpse the future. At that point, we also learn Tim's mother had died of dementia, which makes him sympathize with Annie because she reminds him of his mom. The next day, Luke notices the setup of a new room prepared for another child soon to arrive at the Institute. Excited, he rushes to tell his friends that the new recruit looks to be very young, and he's eager to see what kind of powers the child might have. Around the same time, he learns that George has successfully passed most of his experiments, including the latest one called the Dream Box. George's powers have advanced so much that he can now control coins inside the vending machine without even looking at them. Tim stops by the supermarket and meets Dobira, the owner, who tells him he's a migrant from Mogadishu who came here to escape the war in his homeland. That night, while on duty as usual, Tim goes to check on Annie, who's living in a small tent on the street. As he's speaking with her, he suddenly hears gunfire and rushes toward the market. There, he finds the same criminals Wendy had warned him about. Before he can act, they fire shots in his direction and flee the scene. Tim isn't hit, but he hurries inside to find Dobira bleeding out. He quickly presses a bandage against the wound to hold back the bleeding until the ambulance arrives. When his colleague Drew shows up, Tim tells him to call emergency services immediately and orders all checkpoints to intercept the thieves' car. Meanwhile, at the Institute, Julia sits in her office recording a birthday message for her father. Looking out the window afterward, she's surprised to see Daniel and Trevor speaking together. Trevor pressures Daniel to choose one of the children to enhance into a clairvoyant so they can later sell the child to a wealthy investor. Back in town, when the ambulance finally arrives, Tim's superior praises him, calling him a hero for saving Dobira's life, and insists on getting the report quickly so he can submit it to the unit. He tells Tim that Dobira wouldn't have survived if it weren't for his quick action to stop the bleeding. At the Institute, Luke finally sees the new child, Avery, who is frightened and desperately wants to go back to his mother. Suddenly, Kalisha senses a strange energy coming from him, as if he's trying to control her mind. She immediately tells Nikki and Luke about the feeling. The two are thrilled. This could be their chance to escape the Institute. The next day, Luke is brought by Tony for another experiment. Once again, he's strapped into the chair, and Dr. Daniel injects him with the serum. Luke's chest tightens, his breathing becomes strained, and he struggles to swallow. Daniel instructs him to say something if he sees the colored dots, but Luke is terrified and can barely get the words out. Tony brings over a small screen and places it in front of Luke's eyes, ordering him to focus on it until he sees the dots. Whenever Luke tries to look away, Tony forces him back to the screen. Eventually, Luke begins to see clusters of colored dots, but we learn these dots exist only in his mind. No one else can see them. Luke lies and tells them he doesn't see anything. Dr. Daniel then shows him a paper with a drawing and asks him to describe it. Since Luke can't actually see it, he blurts out whatever comes to mind. Tony loses his temper, shocks him with electricity, and warns him not to lie again. Afterward, they send Luke back to his room to rest. Exhausted and traumatized, he breaks down, bleeding from his nose but too numb to care. Meanwhile, Tim goes to the police station, where Wendy asks about his report. She tells him Drew left his name out of it, even though he was the one who saved the shop owner. Tim explains he doesn't want recognition or to be seen as a hero. He just wants to stay out of the noise and chaos because he still hasn't recovered from the incident with the boy who died because of him. Back at the Institute, Avery begins reading the minds of the other children. He casually blurts out that Luke has a crush on Kalisha, while Kalisha likes Nikki, who isn't interested. The revelation embarrasses all three of them, and they sit in awkward silence, impressed nonetheless by Avery's extraordinary abilities. Later, Maureen goes to Julia's office, and Julia sternly warns her to keep her distance from Avery, since he might read her mind and uncover the truth about the crimes being committed inside the Institute. Meanwhile, Avery is sitting with the other kids when suddenly he drifts away mentally and finds himself connected to Annie, though he doesn't know who she is or why he's seeing her. The only link between them is their shared mental abilities. Just then, all the children hear a terrifying humming sound, so intense they can't endure it or figure out where it's coming from. Watching on the surveillance monitors, Julia notices Daniel and Trevor whispering together. Suspicious, she activates the audio feed and learns they're plotting to sell Luke once his powers are fully developed. Furious, Julia decides to call the organization's mysterious leader and report everything, hoping to get Trevor expelled from the Institute. But the leader warns her that Trevor suspects her as well and says he won't take anyone's word until one of them can provide concrete proof of the other's betrayal. While Julia is on the phone with the leader, she compulsively slices her hand with a sharp object, indulging in the pain because she takes pleasure in hurting herself. That night, Tim makes his usual patrol through town and stops to check on Annie. She tells him she heard the same humming noise she always senses from the Institute, only this time it was far stronger. She doesn't know the cause, but warns him that she's had a vision of a plane crash, an important man named Ramsey's aircraft falling from the sky, and she's certain the Institute is behind it. Tim brushes off her warning, tells her to rest, have a drink to calm her nerves, and even suggests she see a psychiatrist. Annie refuses, insisting she doesn't want to take sedatives or drugs that cloud her mind, and explains she gave up alcohol years ago to keep her thoughts clear. Meanwhile, Avery goes with Luke to buy cookies from the vending machine. He uses his telepathic power to control Luke's mind, making him purchase licorice cookies even though Luke hates licorice. Luke is both amazed by Avery's brilliance and tormented by the reminder that he needs to escape the Institute before it breaks him completely. Later, Tim visits a bar where he meets Kate, who introduces herself as a journalist. Curious, he asks if she knows anything about the Institute. Kate replies that there are countless theories. Some say they experiment on aliens. Others claim they're building weapons or bombs, but no one has ever proven anything. Tim tells her about Annie and how she suspects the Institute is abducting children. Just then, breaking news flashes on the TV about a plane crash, the very incident Annie had predicted. Shocked, Tim tells Kate that Annie foresaw the accident before it happened. The next day, Luke shares his observations with Nikki. He's been watching the guards and noticed their patrols run in 2 shifts with a 6-hour gap. If they want to escape, their best chance will be between 1 and 1:30 a.m. At the same time, Avery uses his power to control the mind of a guard dog and sees into the Institute's back garden. He discovers an old, rusted wall that looks like a potential escape route. Luke is thrilled, calling Avery a genius, and declares this will be their plan to finally break free from the Institute. Kalisha arrives and tells the others she's just gone through the dream box. She's shaken to the core as she describes how it forced her to relive her worst nightmares. The group rallies around her, trying to comfort and support her. Julia later stages a celebration, calling it a graduation, because Kalisha is now being transferred to the back section of the Institute. The kids, desperate to know what awaits her, join hands to form a mental link so Avery can peer into Kalisha's mind as she's taken away. Through her eyes, Avery sees her entering a long, dark tunnel leading into the back section. But the moment she steps inside, his connection cuts off. A wave of interference blocks his telepathy, proof that whatever lies behind those walls is shielded from their powers. That night, Tim makes his usual rounds through the city, only to find Annie dead in her tent. An empty liquor bottle lies beside her, and he assumes she drank herself to death, a tragic end to her paranoia and visions. The next day, 3 new arrivals are brought to the Institute, the twin girls Gerda and Greta, and a teenager named Harry. Harry is terrified, angry, and demanding answers about where he is. Avery tries to calm him, but Harry lashes out and punches him. Nikki steps in, furious, and restrains Harry. The group explains that they're all captives just like him, and promise to answer his questions as long as he calms down. Later, they gather in the garden to talk openly. It's revealed that the Institute conducts special experiments on twins, attempting to amplify each other's powers, which explains why Gerda and Greta were abducted together. Luke patiently explains everything about the Institute to Harry, urging him not to panic and to follow instructions so he can survive long enough to get out. He hints at their escape plan, but warns Harry they must play along with the staff until the right moment so no one suspects them. To distract him, Luke tells Harry to focus on soccer to take his mind off being kidnapped. Avery freezes in surprise, then asks Luke how he knew Harry was obsessed with soccer. Luke finally confides in Avery, admitting that he really did see the colored dots. He explains that he's realized he carries both powers, telekinesis and telepathy, combined in one person. But he kept it secret so they wouldn't send him to the back section too soon, buying more time until they could put their escape plan into action. At the police station, Tim suggests to Sheriff John that Annie's body should be sent to the morgue for an autopsy, convinced she didn't die of alcohol poisoning. John refuses, arguing that the cost is over $3,000. Frustrated, Tim decides to investigate the case himself. Meanwhile, at the Institute, Luke is brought to the testing room for his next trial. He's stunned when they announce he'll be entering the dream box so soon. He's only been at the Institute for 3 days. Dr. Daniel insists Luke is a special case and expresses confidence that he'll come through it fine. After another injection, Luke struggles to breathe as the colored dots overwhelm his vision. Suddenly, he begins to see flashes of future events, things he couldn't possibly know, and we learn that only he can perceive them. That night, Tim sneaks back to Annie's tent to continue his investigation. He finds stacks of old newspapers detailing past tragedies in the town and realizes Annie may have known about these incidents before they occurred, though no one ever believed her. He then notices a small soda can with traces of her lipstick, unlike the empty liquor bottle that supposedly killed her, which has no lipstick marks at all. This convinces him something isn't right. At the same time, Avery clasps Luke's hand and links their consciousness, transporting both their minds into the back section of the Institute. There, they see Kalisha along with the other children. Kalisha, the only one able to perceive them, speaks with them and begins describing what it's like in the back. She shows them the so-called movie room, explaining that anyone who enters leaves brain dead. They spot Iris, now vacant and lifeless, so detached that she absently stubs out a cigarette in her popcorn, staring into nothingness like a statue. When Avery approaches the infirmary, a deafening version of the same humming noise fills his head, more powerful than ever before. Overwhelmed, he and Luke are forced back into their bodies in the front section of the Institute. We then see Julia burning her own hand with a lighter as she watches the surveillance feeds. She discovers that Daniel put Luke through the dream box without her approval, and she's furious. Determined to keep him under watch, she decides to monitor him closely. A short while later, Julia pulls Luke aside to speak with him in private. She presses him to explain what happened yesterday in the testing room, but Luke refuses to tell her. Instead, he plays on her nerves, trying to gauge whether she suspects Daniel and Trevor. Julia loses her temper, insisting he trust her because she's not his enemy, then storms back inside the Institute. Luke follows her in and runs into Maureen. He tries to draw her out, subtly fishing for any information about the Institute. In the conversation, he learns that Maureen once had a son named Jacob, who died when he was very young. Since then, she's harbored hatred toward the Institute for the way it tortures children. Luke realizes this might be his chance. If anyone could help him escape, it's her. Meanwhile, Tim goes to Wendy and asks for her help investigating Annie's death. He shows her the soda can with lipstick marks and the expensive liquor bottle without any. Wendy immediately notices the discrepancy, pointing out that Annie, who lived in a tent, could never have afforded such a bottle. Together, they begin to suspect Annie was murdered and that the Institute may have been behind it. That night, Luke is asleep in his bed when he suddenly has a vision of the future. Harry killing Greta. Startled, he bolts upright and races to their room. At that exact moment, Harry has just returned from testing, drained and unstable from the serum in his system. When Greta tries to comfort him, he lashes out violently, smashing her in the head with a hammer. She collapses to the floor. Guards arrive quickly, subduing Harry and carrying Greta away, desperate to save her. Luke realizes he's exposed himself. He has now revealed that he's a clairvoyant who can see events before they happen. Terrified they'll transfer him to the back section before he can execute the escape plan, he panics. Soon after, Tony arrives and drags him into the testing chamber for another trial, the sensory test. Luke is locked inside a glass chamber while Dr. Daniel begins the sensory test, asking him what he's thinking about. Luke insists he doesn't know and repeats that his only ability is telekinesis. Tony loses patience and starts draining the air from the chamber. Luke struggles desperately to breathe, his nose bleeding as he bangs on the glass for help, but no one responds. They continue tormenting him until they grow bored, at which point Maureen is ordered to return him to his room. Sensing her presence, Avery reads Maureen's thoughts and soon tells Luke what he saw through her mind. The Institute's infirmary. There, children are strapped into terrifying helmets, their minds completely destroyed, left brain dead. It's revealed that the Institute exploits these children's powers as an energy source to keep its systems and machinery running. Once a child's life is completely drained, Maureen is forced to dispose of the body in the furnace, erasing all trace of them forever. Later, Luke confronts Julia, who suspects he has advanced his mental powers, but is concealing them. She tests him by opening a news article on her device. Using his telepathy, Luke reads it and is horrified to discover it reports the deaths of his parents, killed by Michelle during the night she abducted him from his home. Enraged, Luke attacks Julia, pummeling her until guards rush in to restrain him. Julia reaches for a stun gun to electrocute him, but Trevor stops her, telling her they have a bigger problem. He drags her to the surveillance monitors, where they see Tim approaching the Institute. Tim arrives at the gates and tells the guard he got lost on his way to another destination. Curious, he starts asking questions about the Institute and what goes on inside. The guard repeats the cover story, that it's a research lab for infectious diseases, and firmly instructs him to turn around and leave. Julia, watching this, demands that Trevor eliminate Tim before he digs any deeper and exposes them. Trevor refuses, insisting instead that he'll question Tim himself to determine whether he poses a real threat to the Institute. Julia organizes a graduation ceremony for Nicky to mark his transfer to the back section. During the event, Nicky seizes his chance. He fights with the guards, snatches a stun gun from one of them, and sabotages the lock on the air conditioning room before calmly going with the guards. Luke immediately realizes Nicky did it deliberately to give them an opening for their escape plan. He turns to Avery and tells him it's their turn to move forward with the next steps. Luke later approaches Maureen and asks her for an elevator passcode and something sharp to remove the monitoring device from his ear. When he reminds her of her late son Jacob, she breaks down in tears, unable to bear the thought, and walks away. Meanwhile, Tim is with Wendy, who tells him that Sloane's daughter died near the Institute. For a time, people suspected Annie might have been right, that the Institute was behind the children's deaths, but no one could ever prove it. Determined, Tim vows to uncover the truth himself. Back at the Institute, Luke receives a razor and a pair of scissors from Maureen, who nervously agrees to help him escape. She's terrified of being discovered and killed for her betrayal, but Luke reassures her and promises they'll meet again at the Red Steps once he's free. Not long after, Avery picks a fight with George, prompting a guard to intervene. While everyone is distracted, Luke sneaks into the air conditioning room and sabotages the system, lowering the temperature and disrupting the surveillance cameras. At that same time, Tim returns to his hotel only to find Trevor waiting for him. Trevor explains he's there because of Tim's earlier visit to the Institute. He admits that for the past 15 years, many people have suspected the Institute of carrying out dangerous experiments on children. Instead of ignoring the rumors, Trevor claims he wants to answer them directly. He hands Tim his business card and tells him to get in touch if he really wants to know the truth. Back at the Institute, Nikki is led into the movie room. Tony explains that Iris will be their guide, her final task before her memory is wiped and she's sent back home. A helmet is placed on Iris's head, and Tony instructs the rest of the children to close their eyes. Inside the movie room, Iris is pushed into her final mission. She slips into the mind of a Russian doctor and suddenly finds herself inside the home of a high-ranking Russian military commander. The commander suffers from a knee problem, and under the doctor's control, Iris injects him with a lethal toxin. He collapses and dies instantly. Moments later, Iris falls to the floor, her body convulsing violently. She has succeeded in her assassination mission, but the cost is her mind. It becomes clear that the Institute uses these children as weapons, forcing them to carry out covert assassinations of powerful figures around the world with no physical trace of the crime. Afterward, Iris is taken to the infirmary, declared brain dead, and fitted with the same dreadful helmet as the other children, condemned to generate energy for the Institute until she's discarded. At that moment, Luke decides the time for escape has come. He takes the scissors, removes the monitoring device from his ear, and hides it under his pillow so no one notices he's cut it out. With the surveillance cameras disabled, he relies on Avery to guide him telepathically, acting as his lookout. He says a quiet goodbye to Avery, who promises to watch his every step through thought alone. Luke moves carefully through the building. Each time he nears a guard, Avery alerts him in time to duck away before being spotted. At one point, Julia nearly catches him. She's leaving a storage room, heading right into his path, but Daniel calls out to her, distracting her long enough for Luke to hide and let her pass. Continuing on, Luke slips into the laundry room, where Maureen finds him. She hides him in her laundry cart, pushing it through the halls toward the back section of the Institute. On the way, Tony stops her, asking for a towel from the cart. She nervously refuses, terrified he might uncover Luke, but he lets her pass. She wheels him all the way to the infirmary. There, Luke climbs out of the cart, and Maureen hands him a flash drive containing everything she's gathered about the Institute. She tells him to wait for her at the Red Steps once he's free, promising to meet him there after her shift. As Luke moves through the infirmary, he sees Iris strapped with a helmet. He tries desperately to wake her, but it's hopeless. Her mind is gone. Then he sees the furnace itself and finally understands the horrible truth. Julia had lied. The children aren't returned home after their tests. They're destroyed once the Institute is finished with them. Luke makes up his mind. He won't just escape. He'll expose the Institute's crimes to the entire world. At last, he slips out into the garden, digs at the earth with the scissors, and crawls beneath the rusted fence without being noticed. The scissors fall from his pocket into the grass as he escapes, but he doesn't care. He bolts into the forest, determined to reach the Red Steps where Maureen promised to meet him. Meanwhile, Tim also makes his way into the woods, following the trail toward the Red Steps to uncover the truth about Zoe, the girl who supposedly drowned with her friends back in 2008. At the Institute, Julia sits in the air conditioning control room and grows suspicious. She realizes someone has deliberately sabotaged the system to disable the surveillance cameras during the night. Alarmed, she orders the guards to confirm every child is in their assigned rooms. Back in the forest, Luke reaches a lake near the Red Steps and spots Institute guards patrolling the shoreline. Without hesitation, he plunges into the water, holds his breath, and swims silently to the far bank, slipping past them unseen. Tim finally arrives at the Red Steps and finds Zoe's old cabin, but it's been demolished, clearly an attempt to erase her memory and destroy any trace of what really happened to her. He calls Wendy, telling her everything he's found. Wendy urges him to return immediately with her car, promising to help him uncover the truth, but reminds him she has to start her shift in an hour. Inside the institute, Maureen attempts to leave but is stopped by a guard who tells her Julia wants to see her in the air conditioning room. Terror strikes. She knows this is the end, that she'll never walk out alive. Instead of heading there, she sneaks into Julia's office and watches the monitors, confirming Julia is indeed in the control room. Maureen quickly calls a journalist, confessing that she helped a child escape from the institute so he could tell the world what's really happening. She begs the journalist to meet the boy at the red steps and protect him because she knows she herself will never make it out alive. It turns out the journalist Maureen trusted is actually Kate, but Maureen never knew her true identity. An hour later, Luke is still wandering through the forest when he suddenly runs into Tim. At first, Luke panics, thinking Tim is one of the Institute's guards, but Tim quickly assures him he's a police officer and promises to help him. He notices Luke's ear bleeding from where the monitoring device was removed and tells him he needs medical care. But Luke refuses. He only wants to get to the red steps to meet Maureen. Tim calms him down, gives him his jacket for warmth, and urges him to explain everything slowly. But Luke insists there's no time. Trevor is hunting him to drag him back to the Institute. The moment Tim hears Trevor's name, he stiffens, realizing the Institute is hiding something massive. He decides to stick by Luke and help him uncover the truth. Back at the Institute, Julia returns to her office and is horrified to discover Maureen has taken her own life. Trevor informs her that Maureen had been attempting to betray them by leaking information to Kate, who she believed was a journalist. Julia's suspicions deepen, and she orders security to double-check every child's room. She personally heads to Luke's quarters, only to find it empty. Under his pillow, she discovers the discarded monitoring device. Shocked, she realizes Luke outsmarted them and escaped. Furious, she sounds the alarm, placing the entire institute on high alert, then declares she and Trevor will go on a field mission themselves because Luke being free in the outside world threatens everything. Meanwhile, in the forest, Luke explains everything to Tim, who is stunned and struggles to believe. Tim checks online and finds a news report confirming Luke's abduction and the death of his parents on the very same night. The evidence convinces him that Luke isn't lying. Tim calls his superior John, telling him he needs backup and will head to the police station soon to act. Wanting to be absolutely sure, Tim asks Luke to read his thoughts. Luke tells him he can read minds, but warns that he can't tell whether what someone believes is actually true or false. If a person is convinced of something, it appears real to him. Suddenly, a noise comes from the lake. Tim moves toward it and is stunned to find Kate standing there. She lies smoothly, telling him she came to meet Maureen to secure an exclusive story. Luke steps out from hiding and confronts Kate, telling her Maureen is dead and that he has all the information she wanted. Kate immediately pulls out a gun, ordering them to raise their hands, and finally admits she's been working with Trevor all along. In that moment, Luke uses his telekinetic power to drop a tree branch onto her, while Tim shoves her aside. She falls, slams her head, and tumbles into the water, lifeless. With no time to waste, Tim and Luke flee, racing toward the police station before reinforcements arrive for Kate. Not long after, Julia arrives in the forest. She activates powerful jamming devices that shut down all phone and internet networks in the entire town, then orders her operatives to sweep the woods until Luke is found, warning them that if they fail, the Institute itself will be erased forever. Meanwhile, Tim and Luke reach the police station, where they meet Sheriff John and one of his detectives. After exchanging a few words, the detective quietly steps outside and calls Julia, promising to keep an eye on Luke until she can send backup. At the Institute, Trevor approaches Daniel and declares he's decided to betray Julia. He plans to report Luke's escape to the leader, but insists Daniel must join the call to back up everything he says. Reluctantly, Daniel agrees, torn between his fear of Trevor and his secret feelings for Julia, knowing refusal could cost him his life. Inside the station, Luke tells Sheriff John his story. John is shaken and skeptical, unable to believe such a wild tale. To prove his claims, Luke hands him the flash drive, urging him to watch it. Though Luke has never seen its contents, he's certain Maureen recorded everything to expose the Institute. John plugs it in and plays the files. His expression darkens as he watches a video of Maureen speaking directly to the camera. In the footage, she calls the Institute a terrorist organization that exploits children, admitting she despises the place and has decided to reveal their secret to the world. She films the Institute's interiors with her phone, documenting how children are transferred to the back section, their powers harvested for missions. She explains the horrific truth. The Institute forces them to carry out assassinations around the globe, and each mission drains them until their brains collapse, leaving them vegetative husks. The children are shown strapped into the energy helmets, their minds drained to generate power for the Institute's systems. When one of them dies, their body is tossed into the furnace and incinerated like garbage. In the footage, Maureen even records a corpse being shoved inside. Sheriff John watches in horror as she explains that the Institute has been committing these atrocities for 50 years without ever being exposed. He's shaken to the core. He's barely able to believe his eyes. Realizing the scale of what they're up against, John decides to reach out to a colleague in another precinct for backup. His own station only has 3 officers, far too few to raid the Institute. Just then, Drew arrives. John asks him to cover for him until he returns, but Drew refuses, claiming he can't handle the responsibility. His eyes stay fixed on Luke, and it becomes clear he knows who the boy is. Suddenly, Drew pulls his gun, shoots John, and kills him on the spot. He apologizes to Tim, but says he has no choice. He has to deliver Luke back to the Institute. Drew forces Tim and Luke to cuff themselves to chairs, then calls Trevor, reporting that he's captured them and is awaiting reinforcements. He drags John's body into the storage room to hide it. Tim, panicked, realizes the flash drive is still in John's pocket. He whispers to Luke to pull a paperclip off the desk and float it toward them so they can pick the locks on their cuffs. Luke manages to tug it telekinetically, but stops short when Drew notices him. Drew goes to secure the windows to prevent anyone from sneaking in. Distracted, he drops his guard just long enough for Luke to pull the paperclip fully into reach. They manage to free themselves. Moments later, Julia storms into the station with her men disguised as federal agents. They sweep the room, expecting to find Luke and Tim bound, only to realize they've already escaped. Enraged, Julia orders her team to prep the cars. Luke and Tim are still somewhere in town. She insists Drew come with her, since he knows Tim's contacts in the city. Meanwhile, Luke and Tim slip into Dobira's market, desperate for refuge. Recognizing their fear, Dobira ushers them into a hidden storage cellar beneath the shop and urges them to stay quiet. Above them, the rumble of Julia's convoy approaches, her vehicles pulling up right outside. Julia questions Dobira, asking if he's seen Tim. Calmly, Dobira lies. He tells her Tim was just there, bought a few supplies, and mentioned he was heading toward Portland in a black Dodge. Julia immediately orders her team to move and races off in pursuit. Once she's gone, Tim and Luke crawl out of the cellar, and Tim thanks Dobira for saving them. Dobira reminds him it's just repayment. Tim once saved his life after the shooting. He presses a rifle and a box of ammunition into Tim's hands, insisting he'll need it. For the first time since the tragic shooting of the teenage boy years earlier, Tim grips a gun again, his hands trembling, but his resolve steeling. He and Luke set off quickly, desperate to escape the city before Julia can catch up. Back at the Institute, Avery is dragged into the testing chamber. Daniel orders Tony to put him in the glass box and drain the air. As Avery begins choking, blood running from his nose, his anger explodes. He unleashes his psychic power, shattering the chamber in a violent blast. Daniel is stunned by the display and realizes Avery is the miracle child they've been searching for all along, the one powerful enough to fuel the Institute forever. Without hesitation, he orders Avery transferred to the back section. Tim, meanwhile, arrives at Wendy's house and delivers the shocking truth. Sheriff John is dead. Shaken, Wendy listens as Tim unloads everything he's learned about the Institute and the horrors committed inside. She struggles to accept that Drew, their colleague, killed John, but her trust in Tim outweighs her doubts. She agrees to hide him and Luke in her home. Julia, relentless, splits her team. Some continue chasing along the highway while she and Drew head to Wendy's house, certain Tim will try to seek her out. They agree that whichever group finds him first will alert the other. Inside the Institute's back section, Avery is moved in, his face scarred from the explosion, but his spirit unbroken. He seethes with rage, vowing revenge on the Institute. When he sees Kalisha and Nikki, his fury softens. Yet Kalisha is now mute and paralyzed, her body nearly gone. Avery clasps her hands along with Nikki's, pushing his mind into hers, sparking her consciousness back to life. Slowly, miraculously, she begins to speak again. They three-link minds and communicate telepathically, and Avery tells them that Luke escaped and has already gathered all the pieces, and that he'll soon reveal his true power and destroy the Institute. Julia bangs on Wendy's door and identifies herself as an FBI agent while searching for Tim because he killed his boss in the station. She notices Wendy is terrified of anyone near the storage room and tells Drew to open the door. When suddenly Tim appears pointing a rifle and forces Drew and Julia to stand with their faces to the wall, he asks Wendy to take his pistol, but Drew grabs her and tries to strangle her. Wendy twists his arm, and in the struggle, Drew fires, hitting Tim in the shoulder. So Tim returns fire and kills Drew. Then he threatens Julia that he'll kill her too if he has to. So she gives up and lets Luke take her gun without resistance. And she decides to tell them everything about the Institute and what they do. She explains that the Institute has branches around the world and that the clairvoyants can see future events. And they reveal that Senator Ramsey will become defense minister in 9 years and will persuade the president to declare war on North Korea, and that the first missile to fly over Russia will be perceived by Russia as a direct threat and will trigger World War III. So the Institute carried out the assassination of Ramsey and caused his plane to go down. She confesses that the Institute performs targeted assassinations to prevent a global war, sacrificing groups of children over 50 years in exchange for what they claim is saving the world from destruction. Tim explodes with anger at their decision to play God, and Avery goes into the movie room and puts on the helmet to carry out an assassination himself, but secretly plans to sabotage the mission and launch a revolt against the Institute. He contacts Luke telepathically, and Luke guides him, telling him how to drive and how to rescue the woman in the target's car. Suddenly, Avery grabs every child's hand in the room, and they all stand up at once. At that moment, a guard in the infirmary senses a strange motion around her and is shocked to see the children come back to life, their minds restored as they begin pulling the helmets off their heads. Tony storms toward Avery, intending to shock him with the stun gun, but Nikki intercepts at the last second and seizes control of Tony's mind, forcing him to put the taser in his mouth while it's active. The current fries his brain. Nikki is ecstatic. They've succeeded in the mission, gotten rid of Tony, and taken their revenge. Avery, Nikki, and Kalisha then go to the infirmary and find the guard's body lying there, horribly dead. Suddenly, they notice the other children standing in the room. Everyone moves together toward the tunnel that leads to the back section. At that moment, Trevor cuts power to the tunnel door and locks the children inside. He arranges with one of the guards to manufacture a toxic gas and spray it through the ventilation shafts to kill the kids if they keep going with the escape. Realizing the danger, Luke decides to go back into the Institute to link up with Avery and guide the breakout. Tim calls Trevor and learns that Julia and Luke are with him and on their way to the Institute to meet Trevor. Trevor promises he will bring Luke to Tim only if Tim helps get the children out of the tunnel and spares them. Tim drives to the Institute and gets out alone to confront Trevor, threatening him that he'll hurt him unless Luke finishes Julia before she even gets out of the car. Meanwhile, the organization's leader watches everything on the surveillance feeds, and it becomes clear Trevor was setting Tim up. A squad of guards suddenly leaps on the car, dragging everyone out, but they are stunned to discover Luke isn't there. Realizing Luke has slipped past them and re-entered the Institute while they were distracted, the guards are ordered to find him immediately. Luke, meanwhile, climbs over the rusted fence and slips back inside the building to help his friends. He reaches the tunnel, only to find the door locked. He contacts Avery telepathically, and together they join forces and broadcast to the children in other institutes, coordinating a mass uprising to help everyone break out of this place. We see that countless other children are trapped in institutes around the world. Luke manages to unlock the first gate with his powers and rushes into the tunnel, noticing the structure starting to collapse. He quickly reaches his friends, and together they combine their abilities to blast open the second door. They escape through it, but Avery refuses to go with them. He insists he must stay behind to maintain the psychic link with the other institutes and bring down this one from within. Luke, Kalisha, Nikki, and George flee as the entire facility begins to crumble, moments away from total collapse. In her office, Julia stares at a photo of herself with her father. She calls his nurse and tells her she'll be disappearing for a while, and if her father asks about her, to play the birthday recording she made for him. Accepting her fate, she prepares to slip away before the Institute buries her alive. At that same moment, Trevor's floor splits beneath him. He plunges into the chasm and dies. Outside, Luke decides to obliterate the Institute entirely, so it can never be used again. He links with Avery and the other children across the institutes, raises the building high into the air, and smashes it back down, reducing it to rubble. The mysterious leader watches it all through surveillance feeds. Calmly, he calls an unknown contact, ordering them to dispatch a cleanup crew to erase every trace of the institute, burn the records, destroy the evidence, and make sure nothing proves what went on inside. After ending the call, he goes outside to play with his grandchildren, as if nothing happened. Back with Luke and Tim, Luke asks what Tim's plan is for reuniting the children with their families. Tim assures him he has everything figured out. But Luke shocks him by revealing he's read his thoughts and knows he's lying. Angry and unsettled, Tim snaps at him to stay out of his head. That night, we discover Julia is still alive. She waves down a passing car on the road and asks the driver to take her into the city. Once inside, she slips a flash drive from her pocket, the same one recovered from John's body, her eyes glinting with the knowledge that the Institute's secrets aren't finished yet.